Welcome to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga, and my guest today is Curt Thompson. Curt Thompson is a legend. He is a counselor and an author, and he's written some of my favorite books, The Soul of Desire, The Soul of Shame. It was an incredible honor to speak with him. I couldn't believe that he said yes. We actually had this conversation while I was out on tour this past December. I was in a podcast studio in a church in Kansas, I think. They were very kind to let me use that studio. I've had so many questions I've wanted to ask him for so long, and I got to ask a few of them, and it sounds like we might even get to do it again sometime. We'll see. Here's my conversation with the great Curt Thompson. Well, Curt, thank you so much for making time to talk with me today. I'm super honored. I'm a big fan. I've been reading your books and listening to your podcasts and things for years. And yeah, it's a treat to get to actually meet you as much as we're meeting online. And I know we have a bunch of mutual friends. But I have so many questions for you.
Yep.
And
well, okay. So our listeners can know, like, I just to reiterate what I said to you before we started to record, I'm so grateful to meet you, and as I said before, I'm grateful for just all the many different hues and shades of the good work that you do. That's both musical but also poetic and cloaked with humility, and so I'm just. Like, who is not drawn to that? So thank you for all the work you do. Yeah.
You're really kind.
Yeah.
Well, I was at a conference years ago where you got up and spoke, and I think you introduced yourself. It was the Liturgy Collective conference.
Liturgy Collective in Nashville. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That Tim Nicholson puts on.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think you introduced yourself as, my name is Curt, and I work at the intersection of spiritual trauma and brain neuropsychology or something like that. And your first sentence was like that, and the whole room just went, what? And it was so, I mean, people were kind of still chatting, and then you could hear a pin drop as soon as you said that. And I had I already was excited to hear you, but it was so fun watching that room just go, what is this guy going to talk about? I'm curious, how did you get into this? Those spirituality and neuroscience, like, how do those things work together? How did you get interested in these things together? Where does that come from?
That's a great question. It's in some respects, Andrew. I mean, so and we'll get to this. I think the focus of your podcast, this notion of how we find ourselves in places in which things start to emerge that you didn't necessarily you didn't blueprint this out. You didn't plan. Your life as a 6-year-old. This is what I'll be doing when I'm 16 and then 56 and all the things. I mean, I think there had been a lifelong curiosity about, like, the question. I mean, even though I wouldn't have been, like, aware enough to ask it in this way, but, like, what does it mean to be human? And like, why do I work the way that I work? Why can't I? And especially because I had things going on in my own head that I was, that would be anguishing and driving me crazy. And so, like, why can't I figure out how I work? Now that's going on the whole time I'm kind of growing up in a very small town in Ohio, and went to a very small, high school, and where when I was in school, like, if you're like academically, effective enough, we didn't have the multiplicity of options for all kinds of, career paths that we might think that we have today, and so you're either going to be like a physician or you're going to be an attorney, like, software engineer. Like, there was no such thing as software back then.
Wow. Yeah,
and the whole notion of being a musician, like, I was like, music, like, these are things that you listen to Billy Joel, and then there's like me, and there's the rest of the world. Like, you're not thinking about these kind. So all that is to say is that, you follow down a path that you happen to be pretty good about, and you have some interest in. And so I was effective at science. I had interest in it But mostly I could say, oh, I was following the path that I was good at, absent any real serious conversations with any adults who were really being curious with me about, like, is this really what you want to do? All that is to say, through undergraduate, I ended up in medical school and found myself there rather conflicted. But eventually, by the time I got to my third year in medical school, where I considered like even leaving, and because I wasn't sure I wanted to be here, psychiatry had not been something I'd even considered for 2 seconds. And I tell people, I think Jesus comes and finds me in periodically in new ways. There's a different part of him that shows up and finds a different part of me every now and again. When I suppose he deems that I'm ready to be found by this next part of him. I mean, I can imagine him saying, "Yeah, before, if it had been before today, like I don't think you would have been ready to have been introduced to this part of me that I'm going to introduce myself to you with." And it was in one of these experiences in which I like, oh my goodness, like psychiatry. I think Jesus came and found me in psychiatry. I didn't see this coming, wasn't anticipating, wasn't expecting it. So in medical school, found this great where my interests, this question of like, what does it mean for us to be human? And things that I was, as it turns out, effective at. Like the medical school academic stuff, like I could do that, but everywhere I turned, I wasn't really, nothing was inflaming me. Like, oh my gosh, I want to be a surgeon. And there are plenty of people who want to do that. That's not, there are many things I didn't really want to do. And so it was right there in medical school and then residency. And there's a whole story behind how I ended up, continue to move in that direction. But I think ever since I've been in this space of doing this work, I have been trying to be curious about what does it mean for us to be the human beings that we read about in the biblical narrative. So a Christian anthropology, if you look at what does it mean to be human from a biblical perspective, what does it mean? And I continue to learn, and like I don't have all the answers to these questions, but I'm really captivated by that. And then, as it turns out, especially in the last 20 years, there have been a number of different things that we have been learning in the neuroscientific community. And especially in this particular field that I occupy that we call interpersonal neurobiology, this intersection of multiple different disciplines, interpersonal neurobiology, this idea that we are people of the mind, the brain, right? Neurobiology, the neurobiology, the physiology of my brain and my neurons and all that means, but also how the relationships that I engage with also is shaping the mind, this conversation that the brain and relationships are having with each other. And it turns out that there have just been a lot of things that have happened in the last 20 years that are revealing things about what we're learning about the mind that also are deeply reflective of a Christian anthropology of what it means to be human. And my mind then goes to what we read about when Paul writes to the church at Rome and says, from the beginning, human beings have known from the creation about God's nature and his power, from the material world. And then we read in Acts where Paul's talking to the Laodiceans and he says, God has given you rain and he's given you crops because that's what he gave you to remind you that he is a God who cares for you, because God never leaves himself without a witness. And I think what I'm finding is that we live in a day and age, we live in an era, especially in the West in general, North America in particular, in which those of us who are Jesus followers, we're aware that the way the gospel, the way the kingdom of God is articulated and talked about, and the way we introduce people to it, has long been kind of overcome by modernity and the Enlightenment, such that just telling people about Jesus, it's still a matter, now it becomes a matter of the abstract and so forth and so on. But when you start to introduce people to how your mind works because of what we're learning in neuroscience, you discover that the things that we read about on the pages of the gospel, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, we read about in the letters, the material world of neuroscience is helping to strengthen and reveal what the words on the page are really drawing people to. And
Really?
so we began to find 20 years ago that as we started to introduce people to these concepts, people were starting to talk with us about how when we talk about memory, when we talk about attachment, when we talk about neuroplasticity and the renewal of the mind, people were saying, oh my goodness, you're finally giving me language that's helping me make sense of my experience of what it means to follow Jesus. It's becoming less and less an abstraction. Kind of like it's like, you can say to anybody, oh, the world is round. And for most people, it doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because I'm not an engineer that's sending spaceships into space. Right. So I could be a farmer in Thailand and like I don't care if the world's round or flat. It doesn't really mean much to me.
Yeah.
And in that sense, the gospel has become this flattened thing
Hmm.
where we're kind of left with this abstract. And so therefore, when it comes to even questions about like who is Jesus and all the things and so forth and so on, they are kind of relegated to these rooms of philosophical and abstract discussion and so forth. And this is then what we do with relationships. We begin, it's like this is what the internet, we talk about Democrats and we talk about Republicans. We talk about, all that's a euphemism for all the ways in which we're kind of at war with each other.
Yeah.
But we don't talk with human beings. And, the internet is not helping us with this.
What does that look like in our daily lives? Like when people walk into your office and
Yeah.
they've lost a job, their marriage is falling apart. How does what you're learning about the brain bring Jesus into reality?
So, I mean, a quick example would be to say that the brain becomes more anxious, meaning it demonstrates
Hmm.
the neurobiochemical and neuroelectrical features of anxiety that's what we would say we're experiencing when I am relationally and intraneurally. So neurons that are in my brain talking to other neurons in my brain that need to be talking to each other. And the parts of me that would be good to talk with you when they are sensing greater movement away. Anxiety, for instance, we would say anxiety is ultimately always about my perception that I am being left alone with myself in my suffering,
Hmm.
in my distress. Whether you're a 10th grader giving your first speech class or you're an adult waiting for the diagnosis, is it cancer or is it not? And everything in between, anxiety, even though we think it's about the thing that is right in front of my nose, is anthropologically, it is primally, it is neurobiologically the felt sense that whatever is going to happen here is going to leave me alone, arcing all the way back to the second page of the Bible where we read God in anticipation of everything that's coming. It's not good for the man to be alone. It's not good. And so he's going to complete the job. He's going to bring this partner, this sense that this is how, and in fact, the not good is so not good that it's this partner is coming from the very, as close to him as he can be, his bone, right?
Mm-mm.
It's like, it's not even coming from a piece of skin tissue from outside of, on the outside. He's coming from the very inside part of who he is going to take something in.
Wow.
And make that. And so, for instance, when we say like, oh, the research on in neuroscience would suggest that when I am more connected to you, when I'm literally more connected to you, if I had a near drowning event as a 4-year-old, and I want to have to, and I was an adult and I haven't been to the pool since I was 4, but now my friends are having pool parties and they want me to come, and I'm having this post-trauma reaction to getting into the pool, which I have protected myself from for all these years by
Yeah.
simply not going to the pool.
Yeah.
But my friends say, come, I want to, what do I think? Like, what am I going to do? Like, go on the internet and read, learn how to swim by reading this document? No, but I'm afraid to get in the pool. I smell chlorine. My heart rate goes up. My
Yeah.
blood pressure goes up. But if my friend says, come, don't even bring your swim trunks, just come in your street clothes, and we are going to sit together on the side of the pool, and I'm going to be in my street clothes, and I'm going to sit close to you. And I might even hold your hand if you need to. And when your heart rate goes up and your breathing gets shallow and so forth, we're gonna breathe together. We're gonna take our time and breathe together. Now, what the brain is reading is not, the brain is, the brain doesn't think, like, we don't know what consciousness is, for example. So the work the brain is doing, it's not consciously thinking, but it is monitoring the environment, and it is sensing it is not by itself. And we will see that we become increasingly calm. And if I say, I want you to take 3 deep breaths, and you do on purpose, you pay attention to this other person while you're in the presence of smelling the chlorine and hearing the chop of the water, you begin to create new neural networks that represent new neuron patterns, new neuron connections that represent, I have a felt sense of being okay, little by little by little. I may have to do this over a period of weeks. I'm comfortable and confident being at the pool. Now I'm in my street clothes, sitting on the deck. But at some point, my friend says, well, hey, next week, why don't you come and just bring your swimsuit, and we're just going to put our feet in the water. And we do the whole thing all over again. And by the end of the summer, I might be going off the high dive. And we're not going to do this quickly and so forth. But what does this have to do with the gospel? When Jesus in the sermon, in Matthew 11, where he says, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, or he could say, all of you who are anxious, which is everybody, all of you who are anxious, you come to me. What he's saying when he's like, when you're anxious, come closer. Notice he doesn't say, when you're anxious, here's information for you.
Yeah.
When you're anxious, here are 2 things you can do.
Yeah, 7 steps.
He's saying, when you're anxious, come closer to me. To me. In this world, I have said these things to you, all these things. This is John chapter 16. I've said all these things to you, so that in me you can have peace. In me, not in your theology, not in your profession, not in your accomplishments, not in your this, not even in your commitment to, like, being the victim, or not even in your commitment to being, eternally traumatized and the world owes me everything, and all the other, like, we have all kinds of interesting idols that we can come up with. But Jesus saying, in me. Now there's the challenge with so this is what happens when you say to folks, look, there is a way in which the brain was made to work. And sometimes we approach people, even with the gospel, not paying very helpful attention to this. And so we preach sermons assuming that as long as I give people proper information, that information in and of itself can be the transformational element in their lives. And the reality is, this is just simply not how the brain works. The brain works bottom to top and right to left, meaning first we sense things, and then we make sense of things. I first sense something. I mean, this is what newborns and infants and toddlers are doing. They're having to learn to sense things for the very first time. This never changes.
This almost explains. You say, go ahead. We sent.
Well, as we like to say, this is why the phrase "just say no to drugs" doesn't really work very well, because the part of the brain that hears the words "just say no to drugs" has got nothing to do with the part of the brain that wants to do the drugs. So this is really this is very unhelpful. This is very unhelpful. But when I want to do my drugs, when I want to, look at porn or smoke my pot or whatever it is that I want to do, if I I got to call Andrew. What I need is not more information. I need more connection. I'm going to call Andrew and say, Andrew, I want to go to Netflix and I want to go find a movie where I know I'm likely to find nudity. But the problem is not that I want to go do that. The problem is there's some part of me that really needs to be comforted. And I got to have a conversation with you about that. But what I'm really doing is I'm anxious. And we would say to people, when you learn that the brain is made less anxious because it's connected to people, and here's the data on this, it helps us make it like, well, of course, this is why Jesus would say, y'all come closer.
Wow.
Why is it that throughout that the scriptures are replete with, and I am with you. I'm with you. I would also say that this is also like when it comes to memory, for example, the way memory works. There's certain things that I wish that I could remember that I don't. Like, where did I put my keys, and all the things that I can't remember. I just walked into the room, but I can't remember why I came into the room. All the things that I can't remember. At the same time, there are things that I do remember that I wish I could forget.
Yeah.
Including, the way I treated my wife, or the thing that I did when I was 17, or the thing that happened to me, or all these things. And this memory tends to be the thing that like runs my life. And so what happens if we know that when I have an experience that is troubling me, that this is about memory, but when I realize that there is a thing called neuroplasticity, like we can begin to activate and change neural networks in the brain, I'm not having to white knuckle it. What we need to do is practice. When my felt sense of that memory comes to me, I need to have practices at the ready in which I can pay attention to those things that are genuinely and helpfully comforting, while I am in the presence of this remembered experience that is painful. And over time, the practice of the experience that is comforting begins to outweigh my memory of pain, such that I then began to anticipate that, when I not just remember or anticipate pain, when something painful happens, I can begin to anticipate that help will be on the way.
So what are some of these practices when we're in these moments? What are some things we can do?
In our work, in our practice at New Story Behavioral Health, and in this nonprofit, the Center for Being Known, we run what we call confessional communities. These communities of 6 to 8 people who we have a storytelling model that we use. It's what we call a storytelling liturgy. And when people have moments, I mean, you've had moments when I've had them where you reveal something vulnerable and painful to someone else, and perhaps especially if it's in a community of people. And by community, I don't mean 100 people. I mean a community of 4 or 5 or 6 people that are in the room with you, and you reveal something, and those people, in their non-anxious presence, remain and receive your painful self that you've just brought into the room, and you have some kind of an experience like, oh my gosh, like I feel seen, I feel soothed, I've been comforted, and especially if it's something that I'm naming that I've done that I'm not very proud of, it could be any number of things that I'm naming, but it's something that I'm ashamed of. And people are not there just to, be nice to me or to be empathic with me. They're always wanting. They're also there to acknowledge this and say, and where do we really want to be going? Yes, you just looked at porn. Yes, you. Yeah. Last week you did say that thing to that person, and you want to what do we want to do to correct that? But my capacity to imagine correcting that first has to take place in a context in which I have felt seen and soothed and made to be safe, even made to be safe from myself. What happens?
Yeah.
All right. So I have this moment of having been loved in a deep and lasting way. Okay, fine. It is likely that in 20 minutes, when this group breaks up and I go home or everybody goes home, it will be very easy for me to not remember it. It takes shame, the experience of shame, the neurophysiological response of shame. It takes it about less than 3 seconds to encode and take up residence in your brain as a remembered event. Joy, a remembered event of joy, takes, if you're going to encode it, if you're going to like lay it down, and it takes 60 to 90 seconds.
Really?
Right. Yeah. Of concerted, practiced remembering. It takes creative work. It takes very little effort to make mistakes playing the guitar.
I know.
It takes Herculean effort to play the guitar the way you really want to play it.
Yes.
It takes no effort at all on the brain's part to remember and anticipate shame. It takes lots of effort. And so when a person has one of those moments of insight or comfort or renewal, revelation, something that we would deem to be joyful or relieving, we want them to practice it. And so we'll say, but before this day is over, I want you to go home and I want you to get a journal out and I want you to write the screenplay of what just happened here in the room. I want you to write down where everybody was seated. I want you to write down what they were wearing. I want you to write down what you said, what they said to you. I want you to make the video. I want you to make the movie. And for the next 6 weeks, I want you at least once a day to review this. And what are people doing? People are actively remembering, and in so doing, they are reinforcing and thickening the neuroplastic changes that are taking place that got started in the room in that one moment. If they don't do this, we would then say, oh, this is the scripture being fulfilled where Jesus says, yes, there are those who are healed, which means the house is swept clean but left empty. And when the demon is sent out of it, it goes out and finds its brothers and comes back and takes it by force. So if I'm not going to do the work of memory, then I'm only asking for the next wave of the same event to come in and take over. But those kinds of, helping to explore these things with people and say, like, this is what happens in your brain. And your brain is telling the story what Jesus says in the parable where he says, like, you clean the house out, but leave it empty and nobody takes care of it. And this is what happens. This is what happens in your brain when you don't tend to the memory that you have, that you just had. Like, that's an example. That would be an example of a practice that we would say it would be important for us to engage in order for us to do this effectively. And the thing is, Andrew, all these things are done much more effectively when we're doing them in the context of community than when we're doing them by ourselves.
Wow. Okay, I heard you say something when you were at that conference I mentioned earlier. You talked about trauma and what it does to our brains, that our brains a healthy brain is growing, and that trauma sort of stops or slows the growing of our brains. And you talked about what stimulates a healthy growth. Would you unpack that for me? Do you remember what that was?
Well, one thing that we trauma is a term that has now been bandied about and used so kind of ubiquitously that in some respects we have to be, in some ways, it does not have the same kind of. I mean, when I was in medical training 40 years ago, that was not a word that was used very often. I mean, we might, we would have restricted it to combat veterans. We would have restricted
Trauma's
it to
getting your
somebody
leg
who
cut
had.
off.
Right. Yeah. He's somebody with a history of severe sexual abuse, which was not talked about nearly as frequently in the open public as it is now.
Wow.
But there are a couple of features of trauma, I think that our listeners will be very familiar with. The first feature is the felt sense that something is happening for which I feel overwhelmed in the moment, feeling overwhelmed. But the second pillar of this that comes is that I feel powerless to do anything about it. Now, some might say, well, Curt, to be overwhelmed is to be powerless by certain things, but it's important to know that so much of what is traumatizing for many of us is not necessarily actually physically overwhelmed. I'm not necessarily, not everyone who's traumatized is being gang raped.
Yeah.
Right. So there can be the physical element of being overwhelmed and I feel powerless about it, but there are also elements in which I feel overwhelmed by the emotional state that I'm experiencing. And I perceive that I don't have anything that I can do even with my body and so in some respects, we would also say that, a small versions of this would also include any experience that a person has in which I have a significant rupture that is left unrepaired.
Hmm.
Most of our ruptures that we have in most of our families are not necessarily overwhelming ruptures. They're not ones in which, my dad looks at me with scorn and I don't like that. I don't feel it, and so forth and so on. But I can still kind of continue with my day as a 4-year-old or as a 10-year-old. But there is still the sense that there's been a rupture and we haven't repaired that. And what's important about that when it comes to trauma is that collectively, we can have lots of unrepaired ruptures. And when that's the case, we will be sitting on an ocean of grief neuroaffectively in our bodies. We hold every remembered unrepaired rupture.
Hmm.
And I'm going to have to burn energy to manage that, to contain that. I'm going to have to put that in some storage unit neurobiologically if I'm somehow then going to go out and live the life that I'm supposed to live. But, I am not I'm not a creature that has a limitless energy capital. Like, I have a limit to what I can burn. And so at some point, my trauma that could be large, it could be like I'm one of those folks who had, whether I'm a combat veteran or I'm a victim of sexual abuse, horrific things. My child was lost in the shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville. I mean, all these just like things humans that we do, what we do to. There are those forms in which we can be so overwhelmed neurophysiologically that our thinking brain is so disabled from helping us cope with all the things that we are having to contain neuroaffectively. But for some of us, we've grown up in families where nobody would, we haven't had any, perhaps, we haven't had any traumas the likes of what I just mentioned. But collectively, over time, I get to a point where I can begin to live as if I feel overwhelmed and am powerless about certain things. So, for instance, I grew up in a family where I had two parents who were God-fearing parents. There's nothing about my life that is good that does not, in some way, shape, or form, have their fingerprints on it. They're just that's just the way it is. It is also equally true that I grew up in a family where I didn't. I have a father who died when I was 17, who I have no question about his affection for me, his pride in me, all that, and with whom I had not a single substantive conversation in my entire life, in my 17 years. So there are lots of things that should have happened that didn't happen. And my brain does stuff with this. I don't know that it's doing that, but I do some of this. And one of the things that was true in our family is that my dad was a guy who, like, you knew, without there being explicit signage posted in every room, you knew, like, you didn't want to cross him. Like, you got the felt sense. There would be these moments of interaction when you'd see him with my mom and so forth. Like, you're like, okay, I do not want to, like, make him angry. And we was like, Lewis Thompson, my dad, like, Lewis Thompson was not an angry guy. And we would say, well, of course he wasn't, because everybody was working so hard not to piss him off. Right? Now he might have been shocked to have heard this, but I've heard my cousins of say, yeah, you don't want to mess. You don't. Again, he was not an angry, violent person. It's not. But there's this felt sense that, like, oh, so what does this mean? This means that the experience of anger is something that I grew up being afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a guy who's working really hard to make sure that I don't do anything to make people angry with me.
Wow. And you never think that it's just the way you live.
Right. Now, I don't even know that I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Right. I don't even know that I'm doing. But what I do is, like, I end up cataloging lots of anger because for me, I feel overwhelmed by it. I anticipate being overwhelmed by it. And no one, I think, would think of me as an angry guy. But, just a few years back, when I have 3 older brothers that they have all passed away from cancer. My parents are gone. I'm the last remaining member of my family of origin.
Oh, wow.
And when my oldest brother passed away, the last of my brothers passed away, I told my wife, like, within 3 weeks, I said, like, I don't know all the sources of this, but I'm becoming a gathering storm of rage.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, and it makes sense to me because now there are all these things that, as we say, there are just certain things you're not allowed to say out loud until certain people are dead. And then when they are, there's like all this stuff that you say, oh, now I can finally say these things because I'm not afraid to say them. And you find, gosh, I think I could go and single-handedly with an axe clear an old growth forest in the Smoky Mountains. I have this much energy of anger.
Wow.
But again, this is one of these situations where we say, like, I'm overwhelmed by something, and what my brain needs, and what my brain needs if I'm one of those victims of serious trauma that we've named. My brain needs resources. My brain needs connection. My brain needs to know that someone else will be present with me while I am with the parts of me that feel like they are disconnected, like I can't get my emotion and my thinking brain to talk to one another. Because this is what trauma does. It tends to disable our brain from thinking coherently as a unified whole. It's like the orchestra. The brain is like an orchestra in the sense that you have differentiated parts, just like you have sections of the orchestra, but those sections also have to be linked together. You need a conductor who can bring them all together. You don't want an orchestra that's going to play Beethoven's Ninth and they all play the same notes. But at the same time, you don't want Beethoven's Ninth played by 4 sections that play all of their notes perfectly, but they're not paying attention to any of their sections. I don't want that either. So I need a conductor to come in to do that in the brain. It's the middle prefrontal cortex of each human that can help me do that. But what happens if somebody brings a 4x4 off-roader and just runs over the orchestra on the stage? I mean, this is what trauma does. It disintegrates our capacity. And so we need outside help to come and help us do this, help us clean up the mess, and to say, I don't have a time frame by which this needs to be cleaned up. I'm here for as long as it takes.
Wow.
Our the pastor and his wife of the church where we worship here in Washington 2 years ago lost their son to suicide. And this is it's a widely known thing. And in the presence and wake of this, he was like just close to his 18th birthday. And what do you say? What do you do? And in the moment of this kind of tragedy, you're thinking, well, goodness, like I can't even imagine how long it's going to take to recover from this. And the answer to that question, how long will it take, is as long as it takes.
Yeah.
And, we look at the gospel and we'd say, oh my goodness, the biblical narrative is a story that demonstrates to us that God is taking a very long time to do what he's doing. And his doing that is an indication of how thorough he wants to be, and how committed he is to every thread of unrepaired rupture being repaired.
Yeah.
Being healed.
Wow. Yeah. I know the last season of your podcast has been all about rupture and repair, and it's just been beautiful as you've gone deeply into that. It's really powerful. Thank you so much for making time to do this. This was a real treat.
Thank you. Again, I just want to say I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to meet you and talk with you, and just really grateful for your work, what you're doing.
I'm honored, and I feel the same. Thank you very much, Curt. Have a great day.
All right. Very good.
You.
All right. We'll see you.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Well, as you can tell there, Curt had to go to another meeting, and so we just had to stop. But he said, I would love to come back. So I'm going to take him up on that, and we're going to finish this conversation another time. I had just literally asked him another question, and he was like, I would love to talk about that. I have to go. So I've got the question marked, and we're going to get together soon and finish that chat. What a brilliant guy. If you have not read his books, The Soul of Desire, The Soul of Shame, in particular, he's got a bunch of books, but those two in particular have meant a lot to me and a lot to people I love. I cannot recommend them highly enough. They're so great. He had a podcast for a long time. I think it's on hiatus right now. I'm sure they're going to come back. He's done a bunch of seasons where they go through just different topics for a little while, and then they take a break, and then they tackle another big topic. That's also really, really great. So you should definitely check out Curt's podcast. If you want to stay in touch with me and what we've got going on, which is starting to be a good little bit, you can find me over at my Substack. Yeah, you can find that at my website, andrewosenga.com, or Substack. I think it's andrewosenga.substack.com. I should know this. But we've got a lot going on there. That's why we're doing the Bible reading plan for the quiet hours. I'm also starting to take some questions for kind of a reader mailbag about creativity and songwriting, and I'm working on a new project about church songwriting. So if you have questions about songwriting for the church, which is the world I've been working in for the last 10 years, I'm going to start writing about that a lot more on the Substack here soon. I'd love to know what questions you have. Please email me your questions, and I'd love to start talking about that in earnest. So you can find that all on the Substack. It's also where you can support the podcast and me and the work that I'm doing here in my team. Also, I haven't really thanked the people that I work with on the podcast for a long time, but I work with a great team called Four Eyes Media. They've done so much work to organize these guests, Abby and Laura. I'm so thankful for the work that they do. We would not have these incredible guests if they were not doing such amazing work. Oh, also, while we're talking about great books, you should mention that I have one. It's called How to Remember, and you can buy it places. Okay, shameless plug. All right, we'll be back in another 2 weeks with another great episode. You are not going to want to miss it. Stay tuned. For now, go do something awesome.